Hello there, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixkin. Are you ready for a tale of the Old West, where life was tough, but the human spirit was tougher? If you appreciate stories of resilience, courage, and a touch of good old-fashioned justice, then hit that like button and subscribe to Saddle and Sixkin. We specialize in stories that resonate with those of us who've seen a few seasons change, especially for those over 40. We're diving deep into a story today that'll grip you tight, so get comfortable, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and let's ride. Our story begins with a sound that would make your blood run cold, the whistle of a rope cutting through the air, followed by the sickening thud as it struck flesh. Again, and again, and again. It wasn't some playful game, it was a brutal, calculated act of cruelty, a rhythmic beat that echoed the cold hearts of the onlookers. A woman named Margaret Walsh stood there, enduring this torture, counting each strike in silent defiance. 97, 98. Her back was a canvas of torn flesh and blood, her dress shredded and clinging to her wounds. The physical pain was excruciating, but the whispers were almost worse. Cursed, they hissed. Worthless. Better off dead. 99. It's tough to imagine the strength it would take to just stand there and take it, wouldn't you agree? The man wielding the whip, a blacksmith named Samuel Hadge, paused to wipe the sweat from his brow. The October sun hung low, casting a blood-red glow over the Kansas prairie and the nearby river. Margaret blinked, wondering if the crimson haze was from her own blood or simply her blurring vision. 100. The final strike landed, and her knees buckled. She had refused to scream, refusing to give her tormentors the satisfaction. But as the rope binding her wrists was cut, she collapsed into the mud at the river's edge, a broken figure of defiance. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, what kind of story is this? But hang in there, folks, because this is where things start to turn around. This is a story about redemption, about finding hope in the darkest of places. If you're enjoying this, don't forget to like and subscribe to Saddle and Sixkin. We've got more stories just like this coming your way. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood's voice boomed across the crowd, declaring that Margaret Walsh had paid for her sin of barrenness, 3 years wed with no child to show. The Lord's judgment is clear, he proclaimed. The crowd began to disperse, women pulling their shawls tighter, men spitting tobacco into the dirt, children staring wide-eyed at the broken woman in the mud. Her husband, or rather, her former husband, Theodore Walsh, stood among them, his arm wrapped around young Sarah Morton, barely 16, her cheeks promising fertility. He didn't even glance back at Margaret. Not once. The river murmured beside her, uncaring. And in that moment, Margaret considered simply rolling into the water, letting the current carry her far, far away from this cruel world. But she didn't cry. She hadn't cried when the physician told her she could never bear children. She hadn't cried when Theodore took up with the Morton girl. She hadn't cried through 100 lashes. She would not cry now. It takes a special kind of grit to withstand that kind of pressure, don't you think? To not break, even when everything and everyone is against you. Remember to like and subscribe. Miles upriver, a widowed father named Caleb Stone was calling for his youngest daughter, Emma. "Emma, answer me, girl," he shouted. He scanned the prairie nervously, his heart pounding in his chest. 7-year-old Emma had wandered off again, chasing her insatiable curiosity. "Sarah," he called to his eldest, only 13 but already carrying the weight of a grown woman. "Where did she go?" "She said she wanted to find pretty rocks by the river," Sarah answered. Caleb cursed under his breath, grabbing his rifle. Wolves had been seen near the water last week. "Thomas," he told his 10-year-old son, "keep the fire going. I'll be back." The sun was sinking fast, and the October air turned cold as Caleb hurried along the riverbank. "Emma, you answer me now, girl." His voice echoed against the cottonwoods. Finally, a small voice called back, "Pa. Come quick." He found Emma standing frozen by the water's edge. At her feet lay a figure. For a moment, Caleb thought it was a body washed downstream. But then he saw the blood, the shredded dress, and the deliberate rows of wounds across her back. "Emma, get back," he said sharply. "But Pa, she's hurt bad." Caleb knelt, gently turning the woman so her face lifted from the mud. She was barely breathing. His soldier's eyes took in the damage, each lash cruel and calculated. He had seen men flogged in the war, but never like this. "Who did this to you?" he whispered. The woman's eyes fluttered open, gray like storm clouds. She tried to speak, but only a croak came out. "Don't try to talk," Caleb said quickly, pulling off his coat and draping it carefully around her shoulders so it wouldn't touch her wounds. "Emma, give me your apron." Caleb dipped the cloth in river water and cleaned the mud from the woman's face. She flinched but didn't make a sound. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Margaret," she whispered at last, her voice raw. "Walsh." Caleb knew of the Walshes. Theodore ran the feed store in town. But this wasn't a husband's discipline. This was something darker, something twisted. "You'll come with me," Caleb said firmly. "My place isn't far." Margaret shook her head weakly. "I didn't cry," she whispered, her voice breaking somewhere between pride and devastation. 100 lashes. "I didn't cry." Caleb's chest tightened. "No," he said quietly. "I don't suppose you did." And that's how it begins, the start of a true journey. What do you think, will she make it? Will she find happiness again? With his arms steadying her, they began the slow walk upriver. Emma ran ahead to tell Sarah to heat water, her braids bouncing in the fading light. Margaret leaned on Caleb when she had to, pulled away when she could manage on her own. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen, and the October chill had settled deep into the prairie. Now this is a point where it is up to you to like or subscribe. We would really appreciate it if you gave this page a follow. Sarah met them at the door, eyes wide with shock. "Pa." "What?" "No questions, just water." "Hot water, and plenty of it," Caleb ordered. The cabin was small but warm. The touches of Caleb's late wife still lingered, her quilt on the bed, dried flowers in jars, a Bible on the mantel. Caleb guided Margaret into a chair by the fire while Sarah hurried about, preparing cloths and bandages. Caleb worked carefully, his hands steady, though his jaw clenched tight at every wound revealed. Whoever did this hadn't meant to punish, he thought. They meant to scar. "Why?" he finally asked aloud. Margaret stared into the flames. 3 years married. No babies. They called me cursed. Theodore wanted a divorce. The mayor said I had to pay for my sin first. Sarah gasped. "What sin is not having babies?" "Hush, Sarah," Caleb said gently, though his own heart burned with anger. When the bandages were finally in place, Margaret sat wrapped in one of Elizabeth's gowns, her back covered in honey-soaked cloths. She was stiff, trembling, but silent. "You'll stay here tonight," Caleb told her. "I can't." "You can, and you will." Margaret looked at him properly for the first time, really seeing him. His weathered face, his strong hands, the tired kindness in his eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Caleb thought for a long moment. "Because once, a family of strangers took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Because my Elizabeth used to say, you measure a person not by how they treat their equals, but how they treat the ones the world casts aside." Margaret bowed her head, unable to speak. That night, as the fire burned low and Caleb sat guard with his rifle across his knees, Margaret lay in Sarah's bed, too weak to move, too proud to cry. The pain of her wounds throbbed, but beneath it, something else stirred, something she hadn't felt in a long time, the terrifying possibility of hope. The fever came in the night. Margaret thrashed in the narrow bed, her body caught between waking and nightmare, her back aflame despite the cool honey poultices Sarah pressed against her skin. She muttered words that broke the young girl's heart, about the river, about stones thrown, about never crying no matter how many lashes they gave her. Caleb kept watch, pacing between the fire and her bedside. He had seen fever before, nursed Elizabeth through her final illness, but this felt different. Margaret was not just fighting infection, she was fighting shame, fury, and a loneliness carved too deep. At dawn, Caleb brewed willow bark tea, stirring in precious herbs from Elizabeth's garden. He cradled Margaret's head, helping her sip. "Safe," he told her, his voice steady. "You're safe here." Her gray eyes fluttered open, clouded with pain but sharp enough to study him. "I should go," she rasped. "You'll go nowhere," Caleb answered firmly. "Not till those wounds heal." From the main room came the clatter of breakfast, Sarah's voice firm with an authority far beyond her years, ordering Thomas and Emma to mind their porridge. Margaret turned her face to the wall. "Your children shouldn't. I'm not fit company." "My children," Caleb said quietly, "have seen loss and hardship enough. They'll survive seeing kindness, too." Something in those words undid her. She turned her face into the pillow, tears slipping silent and hot. For the first time since her punishment, she wept, but not from pain. Caleb pretended not to notice. He simply cleaned and rebandaged her wounds, each touch as gentle as his calloused hands allowed. Dr. Mills arrived that afternoon, his white hair damp with sweat from the ride. He examined Margaret with brisk detachment, though Caleb saw his jaw tighten at the scars striping her back. "Clean work with the honey," the doctor muttered. "Elizabeth's recipe, wasn't it?" Caleb nodded. Mills sighed. "Keep the wounds clean, and she may yet recover." "But, town word spreads quick. Theodore Walsh claims you bewitched him, that barrenness was your curse." Caleb's voice turned to iron. "Theodore Walsh couldn't get a cow with calf if you locked him in the barn." Despite himself, the old doctor chuckled. Then his face sobered. "Mayor Blackwood's stirring trouble. Says harboring her invites judgment. Best be careful, Stone. Fear makes good men do cruel things." After the doctor left, Caleb found Emma hovering by Margaret's door, clutching something to her chest. "What have you got, little bird?" he asked. The girl held out her ragged doll. "Mama made her. I thought maybe the lady needs her more." Caleb's throat tightened. "Go on then." Quiet as a mouse, Emma tiptoed in, approaching the bed as though Margaret were a wounded deer. "She's called Bessie," the child whispered. "She keeps away bad dreams." Margaret turned her head slowly. The doll, the earnest face, the kindness so small and simple shattered her more than cruelty ever had. With trembling hands, she accepted it. "Thank you," she whispered. Emma grinned. "Sarah burns the biscuits, but don't tell her I said so." Margaret almost smiled, and Caleb, watching from the doorway, felt a piece of his heart ease. The days blurred together. Margaret's fever broke by the third night. By the fifth, she managed to sit on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching Caleb split wood. The rhythmic thunk of the axe steadied her. "I had a garden once," she said suddenly. "Roses and vegetables together. Theodore said it was unseemly." "Nothing unseemly about growing things," Caleb replied without looking up. Margaret pulled the shawl tighter. "I suppose not." That evening, Thomas asked the question none of them dared voice. "Are you going to stay forever?" Margaret set her spoon down carefully. "I don't know where else to go. My family's back east, and they wouldn't want me now." Emma piped up, blunt and bright. "I think you should stay. Sarah smiles more, and Pa doesn't frown as much. We need you." Margaret's throat ached too much to answer. She only bowed her head, swallowing hard. It is a good time to like and subscribe and let me know what you think of the channel. The following Sunday, Caleb hitched the wagon. "I can't," Margaret whispered when he told her they were all going to church. "You can," he said. "We don't hide. Not in this family." So, she wore Elizabeth's old dress, mended with Sarah's careful stitches, and rode into town with the Stone children beside her. Heads turned, and whispers followed. Mothers pulled children closer. Inside the church, young Sarah Morton, now Theodore's bride, sat in Margaret's old pew, wearing her old blue dress. Their eyes met. The girl flushed and looked away. Reverend Morrison preached on redemption and stoning, but his words were drowned beneath the weight of gossip. When the service ended, their path was blocked by Mayor Blackwood, Theodore Walsh at his side, and Samuel Hadge, the blacksmith who had wielded the whip. "You've taken in a cursed woman," the mayor declared. "You endanger your children, Stone." "The only curse I see," Caleb answered calmly, "is men who call cruelty righteousness." Theodore stepped forward, face flushed with anger and drink. "She's barren. 3 years I wasted." Margaret's voice rang out clear. "Yes, I couldn't give you children, but perhaps the failing wasn't all mine." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman did not speak so to a man, not in public, not like that. Theodore's hand raised as if to strike her, but Thomas, only 10 years old, stepped between them, his small chin lifting in defiance. "You don't touch her." Caleb's voice was low but proud. "That's my boy." The men muttered, some laughing, some uneasy. But Caleb gathered his family close and led them away, Margaret at the center, Sarah and Emma flanking her like guards. The whispers swelled behind them, sharp as knives. Back at the cabin that evening, Margaret stood in the doorway as Caleb checked the locks, loaded the rifle, and laid a pistol within reach. "You think they'll come?" she asked. His eyes flickered to hers. "Maybe. But hear me, Margaret. You stay until you choose to leave, not because they drive you out." She studied his face, lit by lamplight, the steady eyes, the weathered lines, the unshakable strength. "Why does it matter so much to you?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Elizabeth lost 3 babies before Emma was born. Folks whispered curses then, too, said maybe God was punishing us. She never let them see her cry, but I held her through those nights. I know what those whispers do to a woman's heart." Margaret's breath caught. For the first time, she saw not just a widower, but a man who understood. Outside, the prairie stretched dark and uncertain. Inside, Margaret felt something unfamiliar stirring, something she had long thought dead, belonging. The night came heavy with danger. 3 riders stopped at the stone cabin, lanterns flickering, shadows dancing across their faces. Wade Garrett, Samuel Hadge, and another man too drunk to hide his malice. "Stone." Garrett's voice slurred. "Send out the woman. Towns decided she goes tonight, or things get unpleasant." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle resting easy in his hands. "Gentlemen, it's a bit late for social calls." "This ain't social," Hadge sneered, hefting a coil of rope. The third man leaned forward in his saddle. "Shame if something happened to your young uns, Stone." Caleb's rifle snapped up. "Finish that sentence, please." Behind him, Margaret appeared in the doorway, shawl drawn tight. "Stop this." "I'll go." "No," came a voice sharp with defiance. Sarah Stone, standing barefoot in her nightdress, her father's pistol steady in both hands. "You won't. Not tonight. Not ever." The men shifted uneasily. Sarah's words cut deeper than any weapon. "My mama couldn't have babies at first, either," Sarah declared, her young voice carrying across the yard. "Was she cursed? Should someone have whipped her?" Silence fell. Even drunk, even cruel, they remembered Elizabeth Stone, beloved, gentle, lost too soon. "That's different," Garrett muttered. "How?" Thomas demanded, stepping forward with a pitchfork gripped in white-knuckled hands. And then, little Emma, rubbing sleep from her eyes, clutched Margaret's skirts. "Why are the men yelling, Pa?" The tableau held, one family standing against the night, against cruelty, against lies. Something shifted in the air, fear perhaps, or shame. At last, Hadge lowered the rope. "This ain't over." "Yes, it is," Caleb said quietly. "Come back, and I'll forget I'm a Christian man." The riders turned, muttering, their lanterns shrinking into the prairie dark. Inside, Margaret trembled. "I can't let you risk your children like this." "You heard Emma," Caleb said firmly. "We're family now. Family stands together." Emma's sleepy voice piped up. "Family protects each other." Margaret pulled the children close, her arms trembling, but her voice steady. "Then I'll never leave you." The barn burned a week later. Flames clawed the sky, smoke choking, animals screaming. Together they fought to save what they could. Together they pulled a calf from certain death, Margaret herself diving into the fire to free it. By dawn, the barn was gone, but the family was alive, alive and standing shoulder to shoulder, soot-streaked but unbroken. Neighbors came, some bringing tools, some food, some simply hands to work. Others, once silent, now whispered apologies. Not all. Mayor Blackwood and his circle still glared from the shadows. But the tide was turning. When Sarah Morton, Theodore's new wife, arrived with bruises on her cheek and tears in her eyes, Margaret understood the truth: Theodore had lied. He had always lied. The curse was never hers. At the town meeting, Mayor Blackwood tried to condemn them, tried to name Margaret as Jezebel, as a curse, as a blight. But Margaret stood, spine straight despite her scars, voice clear despite her trembling heart. "You want to talk about sin?" she said. "The sin is cruelty. The sin is watching a woman whipped half to death and calling it justice. The sin is branding God's daughters as cursed when they are blameless." The room stirred. Women rose one by one, telling their own stories of miscarriages, of childlessness, of whispered shame. By the end, it was not Margaret standing trial, it was the town. Reverend Morrison raised his voice. "Enough. The Stones are family. Harass them again, and you answer to the law and to God." And just like that, the tide broke. Margaret walked out with her family, the night sky glittering overhead, her hand clasped in Caleb's. Winter brought hardship, but also joy. The barn was rebuilt, bigger than before, with neighbors' hands raising its beams. The children laughed again. Emma called her Ma without hesitation. Sarah leaned on her like a daughter. Thomas guarded her like a soldier. And Caleb? Caleb looked at her not as a burden, not as shame, but as a choice, as love. On a December morning, with snow falling gentle as blessings, Reverend Morrison stood in their cabin and married them, not for propriety, not to silence whispers, but because they had chosen each other. Caleb's vows were simple. "I'll stand by you, Margaret, all my days. Not despite your scars, but because of them, because they show you survived." Margaret's voice broke when she answered, "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone. I promise to be your wife, their mother, and never again let shame be stronger than love." The children cheered, Sarah wiped tears, Emma squealed with delight, and Thomas stood proud as a man. Margaret Stone, no longer Walsh, kissed her husband beneath the falling snow. And for the first time since the lash had cut her, she knew she was free. Well, folks, there you have it, a story of grit, resilience, and the unwavering power of human kindness. That's the kind of Western we love to share here on Saddle and Sixskin. If you enjoyed this tale of the Old West, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories just like it. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. And, as always, we love hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and your spirit strong.